Hey guys, this is another short story. This is one I wrote for class over a year ago, last October, and I'm still really proud of this story. It's kind of dark humor, I guess, and just really interested in the kind of dystopian stuff at the time, and still really proud of this. It's kind of interesting. So anyway, I'm just gonna get into it. It's called the paperclip. A paperclip, that's all it was, or at least that's what it was known back on Earth. Amelia was carrying a big one in her bag. It was holding together her important documents. She was still very young, almost 30, which was the legal age in which one became an adult in 2267. Humans on Earth were now living to be almost 200 years old. Amelia could remember when her great-great-great-great-grandmother passed away at 179 years old, and she had been reasonably healthy until she was 160. Not everything was necessarily going well, though, due to the population boom, as well as almost double the life expectancy of 2.5 centuries ago. There was a crisis in population, as well as a drastic food shortage. Yes, that was still a thing back in 2267. As the situation became more and more desperate, it became apparent that too many people were having to fight for their food. Unfortunately, this meant global warfare, which further strained the food supply. It was only natural that the world leaders were being forced to use archaic fighting methods from over 300 years ago in order to avoid almost destroying the planet, as they did in the Great Global Nuclear War of 2109. But then again, the population had recovered and was now at about 20 billion, which was just too much for the small planet to hold. That's why Amelia, along with 250 other passengers and a parrot, was on her way to the remote solar system of Krabalaka. It had only been discovered about 50 years ago, completely by accident, by a scientist named Geometry Polaroid, who was on his way to Sirius, only to be stopped by a giant asteroid collision near the base. Rushing to examine it, Polaroid got out a telescope and discovered Krabalaka, just like that, and that it had a habitable planet orbiting it. The only life forms on the planet, soon dubbed Polaroidus geometricus, were a very strange species of fish, and soon to be 251 passengers and a parrot. The planet was about the size and structure of the Earth's own moon, but it wasn't so heavily populated. Many people who still lived on Earth had vacation homes on the moon, and many wealthy people had bought up plots and built mansions there ever since the Real Atmosphere Act was passed in 2156. It made it mandatory to create atmospheres in every residential body, so no one had to wear those stupid suits anymore. Again, the only life forms on the planet were the ghost fish, which haunted the water, but that was about to change. The luxury passenger ship was cruising along at speeds well over that of light, and everything was going smoothly. 30 years prior, or so they say, back on Earth, relatively young, she was about 50. Archaeologists by the name of Plasma Fish dug up a small book in the old German language. The Earth now only spoke one official language, a modified blend of English, Spanish, and Chinese, now with more consistency and no irregulars. It was dirty, and the worms had eaten a lot of it. Running it through the processor, she had deciphered the ancient text, and discovered that it was, in fact, a book explaining the most wonderful yet somehow forgotten philosophy by the name of communism. Or that was true, at least according to Fish. I mean, just about everybody has forgotten about communism over 200 years ago, and so no one remembered it. So far, the oldest living human was 197, and consequently everyone had forgotten that, despite the appeal, it had never worked out so well in the first place. That's why a group of 250 professionals were sent to Polaroidus geometricus to test out the world's most fulfilling yet strangely forgotten method of economic distribution and government, or so the pamphlets said. Actually, they were mostly going because Earth was overpopulated and it could do without 251 people and a parrot. When the luxury passenger ship arrived at the planet of Polaroidus geometricus, all 251 passengers and the parrot did not hesitate to set up their colony. The assembly was held in a central pavilion near the artificial lake on the planet. The people appointed 20 council members, as well as their leader, Plasma Fish, who read aloud from a little book and made sure that all of the residents knew what to do to live in a communist nation. The parrot would repeat words and phrases discussing economics and social status. Many months passed and all was well. There was no food shortages on Polaroidus geometricus, and therefore nothing to fight for. Some citizens would complain on occasion if the Government had given them potatoes when they asked for sweet potatoes, but overall, no one got into any arguments. Unfortunately, being unused to the environment, Fish fell ill and died without appointing a successor. A man named Polyester Van Beem took over the government, abolished the council, and kept all the food for himself. These were bad times. One day, Amelia was sitting on the outer wall of the colony with her friend Gemini. They had not eaten in several days and were dividing a space packet between themselves when Gemini remembered something. "It never worked," she said wistfully. "Well, what do you mean? What didn't work?" Amelia retorted. "Communism. Remember the history books? Remember Russia and China and North Korea? They all said they were communists, but they were fibbing." Amelia had forgotten. Communism was supposed to be equal, so the leaders had lied. They had lied when they took everything for themselves. They were all liars. Of course, all of those countries didn't exist since the war, but they taught a lesson. Amelia reached in her bag and pulled out her papers. They were no longer there. The paperclip that Amelia had carried was ablaze with fire. She dropped it into the cold ground, yet it wouldn't extinguish. Panic seized her as a robotic voice emerged from the paperclip. "In 5 minutes, this planet will self-destruct. In 5 minutes." The paperclip went up in smoke. "It's the totalitarianism detector," breathed Gemini. "So that was the secret weapon the Earth president warned of. This is how we attempt to keep the peace on Earth and the governments," says Amelia, realizing. All at once, the same thought came into their heads. Run. As the luxury passenger ship flew away, containing 2 passengers and a parrot, the planet exploded, never to be seen or heard from again. Let this be a testimony to all. Governments, do what you promised.